Elegoo recently came out with the new Mars 3. This is their newest machine for resin 3D printing, specifically the desktop size, and also now has a 4K screen, so a super high resolution. So let's take it out of the box, set it up, and start printing. Now, instead of doing a review on the printer itself, I want to show you guys what these machines are capable of and probably give you some inspiration on what you can do with it yourself by tackling various different projects. The main setup of all of these resin printers is basically the same. You just unbox it, take off some of the plastic, unscrew a couple of things, take off a bit more plastic, and start assembling and also leveling the printers. Now, like I said, it is basically the same on pretty much all of these printers, so I'm not really going to go into a lot of detail with this. Just put on the print bed, loosen some screws, level it to the actual print screen itself, install all of the other parts, make sure all those screws are tightened up back again and that they are not moving anymore, and then you are pretty much set up to go. This is all explained in a lot more detail in the instructions of the actual printer you get, so just follow those closely and you should be perfectly fine. And of course, it is mandatory to put in the USB stick the wrong way up, then try it again, see if it works that way. If not, turn it around back again and it should work perfectly fine. Now, not only is there a wide variety of 3D printers out there on the market, there is of course an even wider variety of resins to use on these printers. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this as it is personal preference. Most of the time I simply like to use the water washable resin from Elegoo itself. It is safer to use than all the other resins, easy to wash off with water or alcohol. It doesn't really stink all that bad and generally should be a lot better for the environment. So on these USB sticks that are supplied with the machine itself, there usually is a test file, and that is a rook, some sort of chess piece, also torture chamber for the machine itself. I've printed a lot of those in the past, so I don't really need any more. So let's just print some files that I found myself and are actually usable for my builds, instead of just doing another of those test files. Now, in 3D printing, there are various different ways of doing things. Now, everyone seems to have their own opinion and their own method that works for them, and also knows better than everyone else in the 3D printing realm. So let's just say that I'm always wrong when doing this, and other people know it best. Now, I have tested a lot of printers and done a couple of prints myself, so I kind of know what I'm doing and what works for me. So if this method does not work for you, then please just let me know down in the comments below what you thought would be a better method. Now, in printing wheels, there are various different ways of doing it, and one of the most popular ones is to actually angle the files themselves at a 45 degree. Now, this seems to be putting a lot less stress on the actual printer, as it doesn't create some suction for the entire wheel to be on the print bed itself, and therefore just having a big ring on there which needs to be pulled off of the actual FEP film, and therefore having a lot of tension on there. Now, I personally do like to print the wheels flat or face down on the actual print bed, as that creates the cleanest result for me. It does put a bit more strain on the actual machine, but that is personally, for me, totally fine, as the end result of the wheel is more important for me, and the less cleanup required, the easier it is to use the actual parts on the build. So once you have decided what is the best orientation of the file for you to print, you can move on to adding supports. Now, along with the orientation of the actual file, there is also a big war going around the 3D printing world, which is the best method to use for the actual supports themselves. So the slicer that I'm using here is called Box, and that comes with the printer itself, but it is also downloadable on the internet for free. There is a pro version, which is a paid version, but with an Elegoo Mars 3, you also get a year-long free membership for the pro version when you buy the machine new. Now, in this case, I'm just going to be using the free version, as that is the easiest to use and the most obtainable for all of you guys. So depending on the orientation of the actual part, that is also some factor that is taken in if you decide to use the standard preset or automated supports that support the actual file during printing, or if you go the custom route in adding supports yourself. Now, as you could see earlier with the face down or flat on the build plate model, that is pretty much unusable with the preset supports, or just the automated supports, so to be called, as one side was completely random and the other side with the exact same design on the wheel had no supports on it whatsoever. Now with the wheel that is angled at the 45 degrees, it is a lot better to use the actual just preset supports, as those seem to be supporting the spots that need it and don't do any other supports that are not required. Now in this case that is perfectly fine, but for the other wheel and the way that I like to print it, it is easier for me to just set up some custom supports on the parts that need it, and also in the places that I want them to be, for me to have them easily removable after printing. So on the main structural pieces of the wheel, I'm going to be placing some medium supports, that is in the center, and also on the outer hoop, which is going to have the most pull from the FEP film, where it prints the actual file on, and the actual layers that need to be pulled off. And then I'm also going to be adding some very light supports to the spokes on some of the weaker areas that might need a little help here and there. As you can see, the design of the wheel is uniform all round, so the supports are pretty much the same too. Now it does take a little bit of time to do, but it is well worth it in the end, if you ask me, as these supports are super easy to remove, are not located in any weird spots, and only support the areas that actually need it, and you don't have a lot of supports that are just there for pretty much nothing at all. So both wheels have now been set up with the supports. I'm just looking over them, going through the layers to see that the actual wheel or part is supported where it needs to be. It starts with the hoop, then goes up to all of the other parts, and simply just has everything it needs for a successful print. Now of course I have tried and tested this method a couple of times before, and I know that this wheel will print perfectly fine. It is nicely supported in the center. The outer hoop of the wheel is also nicely supported, and some of the weaker areas on the spokes where it all meets up are now also nicely supported in the center, and that should just print perfectly fine. So now that both parts are supported, I can move on to copying these parts, as I of course want 4 wheels of each, and therefore I just simply need to copy and paste a couple of times until I have the amount that I require. Now that I have 4 wheels of each, I can move on to placing the parts on the build plate itself. Now I can just do this manually, but I can also do this with an automatic push of the button and space them out the way that I want them to be. Now you can space them very closely, but you can also space them out a bit wider, so they don't have a big piece that is all stuck together and needs to be pulled off of the build plate, putting a lot of pressure on it that way. So spacing them out, leaving a little air and breathing room in between, also makes it a lot easier for the printer to successfully print. So with the setup now done, all the parts where they need to be, the supports added, and so forth, I can move on to the actual settings. So in this case I'm using an Elegoo Mars 3, just using the standard machine settings, the standard resin settings, and then just making a little bit of an alteration to the actual print settings. Now the layer height that I'm going to be using is 0.01. That is the finest layer height that I'm known to work on these machines. You can set this up to 0.02, 3, 4, 5, and I think up to 0.1, but that is super thick. You can very clearly see all the layers in there, and that's not something I want to have in my prints. At 0.01 it is really fine. The layers are barely visible, but it does take a little bit longer to print. At 0.05 the layers are 5 times thicker, so you can see them a little more. It does require a little bit more work to clean them up, but it also takes a lot less time to print, about 5 times less. So like I said, you can pretty much just set it at whatever layer height you want. All the other settings are pretty much standard out of the box. The layer height, or the bottom layer count, that's the first 5 burn-in layers, are set at 5 layers. Then the exposure time is set at 2.5 seconds, but with this having a mono screen, meaning that it can print a lot faster, you can just turn this down a lot, and I'm just going to go for 1.5 seconds, as that is a safe one to use for me. Now these settings are pretty much transferable to a lot of other machines, but it does require a mono screen to actually be able to print this fast, but that is also preset on the machine itself once you load it up. so you don't really have to play with this, but if you know what you're doing, you can. And once you're ready, you can just simply slice and save the file, export it onto the USB stick, put it into the machine, and start printing. Also, one other thing on the side here, after you've sliced the file, it does say how long it usually takes for the print to complete. Most of the time this is completely off, but it is just a general thing to keep in mind that this will be at least how long it takes, so you know if you can leave the machine overnight or if it is worth the wait. Again, then you just put in the USB stick to the machine, select the file, and start printing, and simply just wait until it is completed. And then a couple of hours later, if everything has been done successfully, you should be left with a couple of perfectly finished parts. Now, as you can see, there is still a lot of resin on these parts and they need to be cleaned up. For that, Elegoo sent out their new wash and cure station. This is actually a separate wash and also separate cure chamber. I'm filling this wash chamber up with some isopropyl alcohol, the highest percentage you can find. There are some other methods to use. I've heard of simple green, and in this case, since I'm using some actual water washable resin, as the name itself states, it can be washed with water as well. I simply just like using the alcohol as it does a little bit better of a job, but it can just simply be done with water too. Now, one thing I did wrong is actually put in the basket in the wash chamber, and therefore the build plate didn't fit, so I removed that basket itself, put in the actual bracket that can hold two of these build plates side by side, or one of the bigger ones from the Elegoo Saturn. Then simply turn it on and set the timer at whatever time you require your parts to be cleaned. Normally with these smaller parts about 5 minutes should be enough, and since I'm only putting one build plate in, it is best to have it centered, as that is the best place for the washing to take place. The washing cycle is now completed and you can remove the parts from the washing machine itself. Now be sure to check over the parts really well, see if they are actually as clean as you want them to be. If they are not, don't just hesitate, put them back in for another washing cycle and make sure that they are properly clean and all the excess resin has been removed. Then you can simply just shake off all of the alcohol and set it aside to dry for a little bit so that all the alcohol evaporates and you're ready to remove the sprues or supports, so-called in 3D printing, and start just actually curing the parts. One of the things I dislike most is the option to really hurt myself. I've done this a couple of times and I've hurt myself a couple of times too in removing the parts from the build plate. There are some flexible build plates available out on the market, and I might need to invest in one of those for future projects, as it's a lot easier to remove the parts from the build plate with a flex plate than with one of these scrapers that can potentially just really badly hurt yourself. So take my advice and probably go for one of those flex plates and save yourself some harm. Now, before curing the actual parts, I like to remove all of the supports, as now they are still a bit flexible and break off a lot easier. Also, in the background there might be a little bit of noise of a pretty big rainstorm that went on during the filming of this actual video, so sorry about that. Hopefully it's not too bad. The actual rainstorm was pretty bad though. So the parts are dry and all the supports are removed, so I can put it into the actual UV curing chamber and start the curing process. Again, just simply turn on the machine, set the timer to the selected time you want them to cure, and then just let it go and cure. Now, one of the really cool things that I enjoy about this one is that it has actual UV lights from every single angle underneath the actual plate, left and right, so it should just cover all of the parts really quickly and cure them properly in one go. Now, if it didn't cure them good enough at the first cycle, just turn the parts around and set it to go for another cycle. The parts should be safe to touch and handle now as the resin is cured, and with this water washable resin the parts are a little bit flexible still, but super strong nonetheless, and have an absolutely awesome finish thanks to the 0.01 layer height. Now, there should barely be any print lines visible after this. Now again, if you choose to go for a thicker layer height, then the layers will start to be visible. So that is all up to you. And with that said and done, it is time to tackle some serious project, and that is going to be printing a full kit. Now I decided to go with one of these. If you know what it is, let me know down in the comments, and I'll be sure to show you guys in the next video where I tackle the actual build of this kit and show you guys all the ins and outs of what it took to complete it. Also, if you have any more questions about 3D printing, feel free to leave a comment down below, and also don't forget to check out the full playlist that I already have on 3D printing specifically.